Apple's manufacturing chain is in the news and thus raises this question. Do companies have an obligation to create jobs for Americans or to enrich their shareholders? I'm Alan Barton. Stand by for the front page. Joining me in studio, Elan Journo, fellow at the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights, and Terry Jones, associate editor for Investors Business Daily. A recent New York Times article examines Apple and its industrial production in China. Terry, this is a really interesting article. Apple's products up through the iMac were apparently produced in the US, but then we went to the iPhone and the iPad, which of course the biggest sellers that they've got. A lot changed and they went to China, and it's fascinating what they're able to do over there. What do you think has changed here in terms of this manufacture overseas, particularly in the Shenzhen district in China? And is there any moral question about it?
No, I don't think there's any moral question about it. I mean, you go where you can make your product at its cheapest rate. It's amusing to me to hear Democrats, the only thing they'll be nationalistic about is the economy. You know, they won't be that way about any other topic. You know, it all comes down, as one of the economists in the New York Times piece said, to scalability and to the access to distribution networks and things of that sort. And that's
what fascinating. Steve Jobs wanted a different glass coating for the iPhone, apparently within weeks of this thing or less of this thing hitting the product line, and they were able to turn it around like that, including rousing 8,000 workers at midnight to train them on how to install this stuff.
And the glass is actually made here, but he couldn't find a plant or create a plant quickly enough to cut it to the sizes they wanted and needed.
Elan, the authors cite chief economist at the Labor Department who says, quote, companies once felt an obligation to support American workers even when it wasn't the best financial choice. That has disappeared. Profits and efficiency have trumped generosity. What do you think of that? I wonder whether it's like they used to feel this obligation to support American workers, or that these other markets and the ease of creating factories has just made it the obvious choice. Do you think there's been a moral shift in the American industrialist, or are they just following what's best for their company?
I hope there hasn't been, because what they should be doing is seeking the best way to create their products in the cheapest, most efficient way. And if going to China and other places in the Far East serves that goal, then that's what they should do. And I think this speaks to another factor here, which is, as the article points out, there's a real dearth of Americans with the relevant skills. So that's another aspect of the scalability. You can't find 8,000 engineers at short notice, as you can in China, to oversee 200,000 line workers. So we have a real issue in the state of our education system and the kind of ethos that a lot of Americans have. Are they really seeking the best for themselves and educating themselves and growing and being ambitious, or not? And there's a lot who are not.
Well, I guess that brings up the next question, is like, should the government be acting to subsidize or encourage educational skills in the areas that great manufacturers need? Apple needs engineers. They went over, they could find 8,000 engineers apparently to supervise 200,000 workers or something like that. I mean, tremendous, huge production chain over there. Should the government be taking a role in that, or is America taking its lumps?
Well, America's taking its lumps, but you hope that people are starting to get the message that a 4-year sociology degree or a degree in horticulture or some other degree that's not necessarily very useful might not be the best way to go, and maybe you're more cut out to be a line engineer in a plant, or maybe you need to have a hard skill that you can barter in the real world. One of the things I just want to say is it's very hard to argue that they're going to create $20 an hour middle-class jobs here in the U.S. when people who have no skills and earn only $1.50 can do the exact same thing somewhere else. That would make the cost of the product prohibitively expensive.
The reason the iPhone is successful is that you can buy it for a couple $100 bucks.
Correct.
And the reason you can buy it for a couple $100 bucks, and even that's a subsidized price by the phone companies is that they're able to go to China. Otherwise, the whole iPhone wouldn't exist. But I think part of the moral case here is that they have some really awful stories, Elan, here about worker conditions in these Chinese plants, suicides, sometimes multiple suicides, people jumping off of roofs, people being woken up in the middle of the night to figure out how to install a glass screen. There's chemicals, there's all this stuff. Does Apple, as an American company, have any moral obligation there in terms of these reports of the Chinese workers and their conditions?
I don't think there's any company that thinks it's going to succeed in the long term by abusing or mistreating its employees, and I think Apple would be smart to treat its employees if they're ill-treated now, and I don't know exactly if that's the case. It's been alleged. If they are, then I think it makes sense for them to, because how else will they continue to attract more people and smarter people and more ambitious and skilled ones? Because eventually that's what's going to happen in China too. I mean, they're going to exhaust the number of people they need for factories eventually, and they'll need higher level skills. So I think it's all in their best interest to treat their employees well. Now, does that mean they should treat them to the standards of our employment regulations and wage rates here in the US with all of the apparatus that's involved there? I don't think that's true, because what we have here are standards that are inflated many times and that are really anti-productivity. If you employ people, you get an inkling of some of what is involved just in taking care of the legal aspects of it, and it's scary.
There's an interesting part of the article describing a dinner that back when Steve Jobs was alive that Obama had with Jobs and a number of people. And Jobs told Obama those jobs that have gone overseas to China, they're not coming back.
No.
They're not coming back. He's quite straight with him, although he said, the country is insanely great, which was his sort of a way of describing a lot of things. But Jobs was advocating tax holidays for businesses. And you're hearing this now, even in the current debate, the idea Obama wants to give a tax break to those who manufacture in the United States. Is that a valid use of government power to try to encourage people to build here in America?
No, it isn't, because it introduces distortions into the market, and you will end up paying for it by paying a lot more for these things. So unless you out there in consumer land are willing to pay, say, $1,500 or $2,000 for an iPhone, and I suspect that very few people would pay that much, then you would say, no, that's a very bad idea. And a lot of this is wrapped in this mythology that somehow America is being hollowed out, and this is both a conservative and a liberal shibboleth, that America is being hollowed out. We don't make anything anymore. Total lie. Our manufacturing has never been at a higher level. We just do it with a lot fewer people. That's a productivity gain.
Well, and also there's the forgotten man in this side of the equation, namely Apple's shareholders, who have done very well for themselves and involved millions and millions and millions of normal Americans own Apple stock and have done very well with it by the fact that they're productive. And also, how many businesses have started off of the iOS and off of iPhone software and app development, and where are those apps being developed and programmed? A lot here in the United States. And people forget about the waves of productivity that come from this one idea of a machine built in China.
And those are advanced jobs. Those are not $1.50 an hour assembly jobs like the ones that are in China. Those are jobs that require higher level skills. And that's why it's really a skills issue rather than a company issue. All
right, last issue here, Elan. Apple's chief, Tim Cook, last year received stock grants, $427 million on stock options on a salary of $1.4 million. You hear this issue being brought up a lot when you get to sort of economic bullying and stuff like that. These guys, these CEOs, are now being paid at a scale so much more than the average worker. This is the big argument that is made, and they go to fairness. It's not fair that someone gets paid that much more when they're Chinese workers who are being woken up at midnight being paid $1.50.
Well, the Chinese workers have a choice not to work there. And the truth about CEO pay is that there are many more considerations than people realize that go into it. Now, the people who make that final decisions are the ones who own Apple, the stockholders and the major investors, and it's their call. And I support whatever call they make, because they're the ones who have to figure out how do we keep Cook on staff. Now, just go back to what Apple was like before Jobs came back. The company was cratering. I think all of that just underlines the role a CEO can have in a company, which just reinforces the idea that maybe they deserve a lot more money than people realize. Now, whether this is the right amount, it's not for me to judge, but certainly you want to keep the best CEO you can find, and that's a hard thing to do.
Any last words on CEO compensation?
Yeah, CEO compensation should be a function really of the company's board and its shareholders. They're the ones who own it and operate it. This is not a utility. It's privately owned by shareholders, and the shareholders should determine that.
All right, guys, interesting conversation. Thank you. For Elan and Terry, I'm Alan Barton, and you've been watching Front Page.